Hello, everyone. In this short talk, I wanted to just give you, some ideas on how to approach, not just to write a paper, but really to comprehend, when you're doing some research and some reading. I mean, so let's pretend that you have an assignment coming up, and you need to do some research, and you've done the research, and you have, I don't know, 4 or 5 articles to read. It can be overwhelming, right? Like, where do I start? How do I take notes? How do I find the most important information? And so I have a strategy I want to kind of walk you through, and what I recommend that you might try for yourself. Not only will this make your papers better, but it'll make you smarter. You'll comprehend more of what you learn, and also it'll make learning fun again. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here, is how can we make learning fun, and it should be fun. All right, so let's assume you have an article in front of you. What do you do? I think the first thing is to estimate how much time you're going to need to go through that article. Or if you have, several articles, maybe you have 3 assigned articles for class, and then you realize that, this is a topic that you're not that familiar with. And so you're going to need to read an additional couple articles. So in other words, figure out how many things you have to read, and make an estimation of how much time that'll take. So for this example, let's assume that you need 2 hours to read for this week's assignment. So that's step one. Without an estimate, it gets complicated, right? You don't know how much time to put aside for reading. You don't know exactly what to expect. So I think this first tip is really, really important. Next step is to put this on your calendar. Go to your calendar, however you use your calendar, and schedule it like you would schedule a meeting. 8 to 10 at night, 6 to 8 in the morning, whenever this works for you. And again, most of us can only be productive in 90-minute slots. But that's assuming that you take breaks. So let's assume you schedule yourself from 6 until 8 p.m. The next thing I would do is I'm a little bit ahead of myself, but when you start the process, I would set your clock so that you could take a break every 20 minutes. This is what I do. So every 20 minutes, I get up, walk around a little bit, stretch, get some water, about 2 minutes. So about 2-minute break, right? And then you sit down, it recharges you. Also, it's not good to sit, for 2 hours straight. So every 20 minutes, take a break. And I think that'll get you through the 2 hours. After 2 hours, comprehension goes way down. So if you have more reading to do than a couple hours, I would certainly break that up into different time zones. All right, so now you're about to read. First of all, and you're not going to want to hear this, I suggest to actually print, if it's an article, print the article and read it in your hands, the old-fashioned way. And this is going to be hard for many of you because you're used to reading online and scrolling quickly and so on. Studies have shown, and the research I've done as well, show that your comprehension is going to be deeper when you're physically holding a book or a piece of paper. So when you hold something and you turn pages and you read with a marker, which I'll get to in a moment, the information goes into long-term memory. When you're just scrolling information and writing notes, information, or depending on how you take the notes, information tends to kind of be retained only in the short term. This is why I love my library. You can't see, but throughout my house, I have several areas of my house with my library. These are, a few thousand books that I've collected over my life. I'm not sure where I'd be without them. Sometimes I'll read them once in a while. Sometimes I'll alphabeticalize them, but most of all, when I walk around the house and I look at them, it brings me back to that time and place where I read that book and I acquired that information. A couple of years ago, I decided, well, everyone's been telling me just, go, just use your ebooks and use your iPad. But I couldn't imagine what my empty bookshelves would look like if I just stuck everything on an iPad. So anyway, for about 3 months, as an experiment, I started reading just, through Audible and, I'm sorry, Audible I listened to, but I started reading through uh, a Kindle. I'm sorry, Kindle, and I started reading, and online. And on one hand, it was nice. I could make the font big. I could scroll quickly. There's a place for bookmarks. I'm always losing physical bookmarks. But I found after a few months that I was not comprehending what I was reading, nor was it fun. And it was distracting because, it's very easy once you're on an electronic device to take a minute and, go somewhere else online. So for myself, I stopped doing that. And now I really get a lot of pleasure about, picking up a physical book, turning the pages. But the main point here, aside from my story, is you will learn better when you actually are touching something. All right, so now you have your article. Now that I've given you that sermon, you have the article. Take a marker, a colored marker, preferably a yellow marker, and read pretty quickly the article first. And just yellow words that you think are key, keywords, key terms, and so on that kind of pop up at you. So that's the next step. Okay, then it's time for an outline. So you have your article, you have 10 to 15 words or terms that are highlighted. There's different ways to do outlines. My whole life I've been doing what's called mind mapping. Mind mapping is a process developed by Tony Buzan back, like in the 1960s. And it takes advantage of the right side of your brain and also long-term memory. And so, by the way, there is a tool. If you go to Google and just Google mind mapping, there's plenty of free tools you can get. I like Inspiration Software. I think it's only like $30. And, if you really get into this, it allows you to really make some elaborate mind maps. I make mind maps of pretty much everything I do, from designing, my classes in 15-minute increments to writing papers and speaking and so on. So the way mind mapping works, and I've given you a link here if you want to read more about it. Say this topic is about stress, right? So you take a piece of paper, or you could use the software, but sometimes, again, because you're using your physical hand, a piece of paper is better. So you take a piece of paper, you draw a circle, and in the middle, you write the word stress, because that's your topic. And then you go back now and you look at this article, and you take those, 8 to 10 or 12, not too many words or terms that you highlighted, and you draw branches. So it kind of looks like the sun by the time you're through, if you follow me, around the circle. And then, sometimes you might make some sub branches. So you might put stress, and you might put a line, and you might put something you learned that stress causes the most accidents at work. And then you learn that the stresses at work is usually caused by bad bosses. So you might have a little branch that says bad bosses. Stress, accidents at work, bad bosses. Just those words will trigger a lot of ideas for you and information. So when you're through with this mind map, you should have, 8 to 10 major ideas, and maybe 20 or so, depending on how long the article is, ideas and sub ideas. And that is enough to now write your paper. So the next step is you sit down and you make your final paper outline. If you're writing a research paper, depending on what the requirement is, maybe the outline is to have a research question, a literature review, right? I'm sorry, a research question, maybe an introduction. We introduce your ideas, and then you have a literature review where you bring in some of the ideas from these articles using your own voice, and then you have a summary and conclusions. But irregardless of what the format of the article is or your template is, you now could look back at your mind map, and you could make a logical outline just based on those branches that you've drawn. For example, maybe the first 3 branches you drew was causes of stress, strategies to lower stress, my personal experiences with stress, just as an idea. Now, if you plotted that on your paper, you would kind of have a logical flow, right? Versus just, you have a bunch of articles about stress, you have a blank piece of paper to type, and you don't know where to start. So you get the idea. Hey, as an aside, I really encourage you in your writing, to use your personal voice. You know, I agree, I believe, in my opinion, I don't agree. Oh, I disagree. When you use your personal voice, you really become, you know, the expert in your writing. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. There are a lot of other processes I can teach you, but this is one that seems to work pretty well, and it will increase your comprehension, and you'll learn more. And I think it's fun. Now, an even more fun way, which I'm not going to cover, but I gave you a link here, is to do index cards. You know, when I completed my PhD, I have to tell you, I followed this process. You know, I had index cards, and on each index card, I numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So index card, you know, number 1, if this was an index card, which I don't have with me at the moment, I would put number 1, and I would write down less than 6 words. There's a guy named Moore back in the 1960s, 7 words, sorry. He suggested that we could only remember 7 things at a time. That's why, for example, you know, your phone numbers all over the world are 7 digits. And he said the idea is to always capture things in buckets. He also said that to change a habit, we just have to do something 7 times differently to form a new habit, which I thought is interesting. I also find that works. So he suggested that the best learning happens in chunks. So when you're making your mind map, ideally you would just have no more than 7, you know, 7 themes, 7 main branches. I mean, ideally. Okay, back to index cards. So I'm, you know, reading a bunch of articles, and I might take one index card. I might put 1. I might put 7 or less words from an article I just wrote on this card, and then I would put a citation, or at least a link back to my the article, so later I can go grab the citation. So I might put, this is from Smith, 1990. So now I have an index card. It's number 1. It says, has some ideas, and it says, you know, shows where I got it from. So imagine, so anyway, this is how I did my dissertation. My dissertation was on joyful work, you know, how a person can, find joyful work and live an authentic life and so on. That was my dissertation, which I turned into a book later. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It was a lot of work, many years of work. And so by the end, I had literally hundreds of index cards, if you could just imagine. You know, so imagine now, you know, a couple years later, I have probably 500 index cards, a lot of information. The next step is how in the heck do I organize that to even start to think about writing my paper? By the way, this would work for you at a very small level if you had just a 2 or 3 page paper as well. Here's the magic that relates back to what I told you about earlier about physically touching something. I am not kidding, because I learned this from someone. At that point, I sat on the floor with, you know, 500 note cards, index cards, and I literally just went like this and just started looking at them, and then I started to organize them, right? Which one's one, so, you know, which one's 1, which one's 2, and even though they were numbered, I changed the order. So I started laying them out on the floor, like if you can imagine in like a trail, in terms of where the ideas fit. Well, this idea fits here, and this idea fits here. It was like, kind of like a puzzle. This took me probably a week, by the way. This isn't an easy task. But when I was through, and providing I didn't vacuum or no one came into my office and touched those, I literally had my paper all written, because I had all the note cards lined up in exactly the order that I was going to write. And then I sat down to write my dissertation. First, I picked up the first note card. I did number them, by the way, in case they got messed up. So I pick up the first note card, and I'm able to sort of write my paper from the first. Then I pick up the second one. So it really logically, just like I told you earlier, helped me to do that. So a long story, I know, but some of you that like this concept will find a lot of benefit with using note cards. And there's different variations on how to use note cards. So I'm giving you a link to show you how to use note cards. So that's all I wanted to cover in this talk. 3 points is that, number 1, it's, you know, it can be overwhelming to write a paper. And so number 1, I think it's important to, you know, organize your writing, figure out how much time it's going to take. Number 2, go through articles fairly quickly with markers mark the key ideas. And 3, put together a mind map or a trail of index cards. And 4, by the time you sit down to write, you know, it's going to be fun, and the quality of your work is going to be pretty good too. So I hope this gave you some ideas. That's all I wanted to cover. I hope you're having a great evening or night when you do view this, and I'll see you in class soon. Take care, everyone.